Welcome back to the GBC Minicast. I'm Clay.
And I'm Wesley.
And today we're wrapping up our two-part series on orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Last time we talked about how orthodoxy means right doctrine. It's what we believe, what we teach, and we want to make sure we have a right understanding of that. And Wesley pointed out at the end of that episode, in a very necessary way, that this comes from Scripture. If you know us, you know that we believe that. But I like the fact that he highlighted that at the end. Today, we're talking about orthopraxy, which is the other side of the coin. You want to define it for us, Wesley?
Yeah, sure. So as we've said, ortho kind of means right and good. We said doxy means doctrine. So praxy is where we get the word practice from. So it'll be right practice. And so orthodoxy is what you believe. Orthopraxy is what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've listened to any of our podcasts before, we've talked about this, but it's always good to come back to the fact that what we believe and teach, our faith, is the ground of our salvation, and our works flow from that. And in a similar way, what we believe in our faith, what we teach, that should inform and influence what we do. James teaches us all throughout chapters 1 and 2. I'd encourage you to read the whole thing, but I'm going to highlight a couple of verses here. James 1:22 says, "Be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves." And he also says in 2:17, "Faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." And you've heard us teach on that verse. It does not mean that faith and works cooperate together to produce salvation. Faith is the ground of salvation, and true salvation produces works.
Yeah, inevitably.
Orthodoxy, what we believe, produces orthopraxy, or it should. There are some of the churches in Revelation that Jesus scolded. I think it was Ephesus, right?
Yeah.
In Revelation chapter 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I'm going off the top of my head here. But, Jesus said, hey, you're doing everything right, or you're teaching everything right. You've got the right doctrine, but you've left your first love, right? You're not acting in a way that corresponds with your doctrine. You could have somebody who intellectually knows all the right things. They know all the right answers about the Trinity. They understand the right answers about justification and sanctification and all these things. But if they're not acting accordingly, then something is not connecting in their faith organ. I'm using
Yeah.
I can't do metaphors like Wesley can. Let me read a couple of other verses here, just to kind of drive this home. Micah 6:8 says, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with your God." Right. This should be our orientation toward the world, toward others, that we understand that God is a God of justice, so we act justly to others. And we understand that God has been kind to us, so we show kindness to others. Christ humbled himself as our example, and so we walk humbly before God and others. Wesley, you have anything to add on kind of the relationship between orthodoxy and orthopraxy, or what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the best places you can see these kind of work together is Paul almost makes very little or no distinction between teaching and doing sound doctrine, in particularly like in Titus. In Titus 2, verse 1, it says, "But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine." And then the next set of verses, which I'll summarize in 7 and 8, talk about what you should do. It says, "Teach sound doctrine," and then the next verse is, "Older men should do this, and then older women should do this, and younger men should do this." 7 and 8 says, "Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us." He makes almost no distinction between teaching sound doctrine and then being an example of good works.
Well, I think that's because how we should behave is a doctrine.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right. And it's not all of it. If you are at a church and all they are teaching you is behavior modification, that's not a church. That's therapy.
Yep.
Right. Probably not very good therapy.
Yeah.
Because good therapy starts with what you believe.
Yep.
And I say that both for religious reasons and also as someone who has studied the mental health field a little bit. Some of the most evidence-based practice that shows the most positive effects in people's lives, it starts with the way you think about the world and the way you think. And so the same is true in our faith. What we believe and what we teach affects what we do. If there's a discrepancy between the two, don't you think the world will notice that? We lose our credibility as Christians when our actions are not ortho.
Yeah. And your actions are the ultimate evidence of what's inside. Hebrews 6 talks about this. I'm not going to quote it exactly, but you guys can go read it. And Hebrews 10. But
Love Hebrews.
that's so good. What you believe will ultimately work its way out. And so when you say you believe something, but you do another thing, it might be evidence that you don't actually believe what you say. And we see things all throughout Scripture. Like, Jesus points out in Matthew that, you've heard it say, don't commit murder, but I tell you, you've committed murder in your heart if you hate somebody. Mm-hmm. And so what he's pointing out is what you believe and what you think will ultimately lead to your actions, right? Like, people don't cheat on their spouses all of a sudden. Usually there's some kind of thought pattern of sin and discontentment that leads to that. And that's true for a lot of sins.
One of the things that we believe and is very vital to the faith, I'll leave you guys with this, is that Christ is Lord, right? Mm-hmm. That was the rallying cry of the early church. Mm-hmm. That was the reason early Christians were persecuted, not because they necessarily said Jesus rose from the dead. That was part of it. But they were often persecuted because they said, I'm going to butcher this Greek pronunciation, Christos Kyrios, right? Christ is Lord. Not Caesar is Lord, Christ is Lord. Yeah. And Luke 6:46 tells us, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you, right? So if he is your Lord, have your actions correspond with what you believe. And I'll leave you guys with this, John 13:17. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.
See you.